My name is Michael Druckman. I'm part of the fan club for today's panel and moderator. I'm also here to announce that for the balance of the school year, Schools That Can will be offering a compelling 60-minute virtual session every month. These events will bring together stimulating educators, business or community leaders, or students discussing important issues of our time. At Schools That Can, our focus is on building an education to employment pathway. So these sessions will take important looks at career pathways and future opportunities for some 75,000 students in our K-12 school network. These sessions are an offshoot of our annual forum. There'll be one of three formats. Either it will be a forum session such as today, that is a panel discussion with insightful leaders on a very timely topic, or an E2E chat that will be an intergenerational conversation focused on student voice, or in partnership with Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, we will have conversations with eminent leaders on equity and education, such as the one planned for March 25th. I hope you'll join us for our next session, an E2E chat on February 26th on the topic remote control. For today, we're thrilled to be joined by distinguished practitioners engaged on the front lines in exemplary post-secondary pathway practices. They'll be discussing the very important subject, is there a post-secondary revolution taking place? This is a theme that stands to define an era of life for today's youth that hopefully will bring a clarity to a very crucial opportunity for change. This panel will be led by our enormously talented moderator and education leader, Grace Sue, the Vice President, Education at IBM Corporate Social Responsibility, and a valued board member of Schools That Can. It's my honor to introduce Grace to you. I promise with Grace and this extraordinary panel of thought leaders, you're in for a real treat.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that wonderful introduction. I'll just say that it's such an honor for me to be a board member of Schools That Can, and really helping you to push the mission of education to employment. And Michael, I think I join everybody here on the call today who thanks you for your tireless leadership on this really important issue. I'm especially grateful to serve as the moderator of today's thought leadership session, the very first one. And we have a powerhouse group of leaders who are shaping post-secondary education and workforce development. As Michael said, the title of our session is there a post-secondary revolution taking place? And I did this on our last webinar where I preempted the answer, and I'm going to do the same thing here because I think the answer is yes. A revolution is afoot. There used to be one route to a competitive, well-paid job in corporate America, and that route was a four-year college degree. But given the $1.6 trillion national student loan debt, combined with employers who are saying that graduates are simply not prepared for jobs, there's growing discussion that the financial investment of college may not be worth it. I will say that at IBM, 43% of our job postings have no education requirements, and we are investing in a number of pathways to launch an IBM career, including our school reform work through the P-TECH school model, our apprenticeship program, tech reentry, and skills build adult upskilling and reskilling programs. We are no longer hiring for only a select group of colleges and universities, but rather we're hiring talent based on skills and not just degrees. Many more companies are moving in the same direction, and that will not only drive education innovation, but also education equity and workforce inclusion. As Michael said, we have a great group of speakers today who are going to share their expertise on why these post-secondary shifts are happening, why they need to happen with urgency, and provide exemplars of the revolution that's taking place. Before I start, I want to encourage you all to ask questions, make good use of our chat, and we will try to answer them at the end or perhaps even along the way. So with that, I have the honor of introducing our four illustrious speakers, whose, as Rainsford said at the beginning, their more expansive bios can be found in the chat. So let me start with Paul LeBlanc. Dr. LeBlanc is president of Southern New Hampshire University. Under his direction, SNHU has grown from 2,800 students to over 170,000 learners and is the largest nonprofit provider of online higher education in the country. Stan Thompson is the Senior Program Director of the Heinz Endowment's Education Program and Executive Director of the Pittsburgh Readiness Institute, which works across sectors to promote community and future readiness for K-12 students in the Pittsburgh region. Dr. Quentin Bullock is the 9th President of the Community College of Allegheny County, a multi-campus institution serving 42,000 credit and non-credit students in nearly 160 programs of study. And finally, we have Ryan Craig. Ryan is the co-founder and managing director of Chief Partners and also serves as managing director of University Ventures. He is a prolific writer, including the books College Disrupted, The Great Unbundling of Higher Education, and A New You, Faster and Cheaper Alternatives to College. I'm going to start with Ryan. Hi, Ryan. Ryan, you're on mute. Okay, great.
Yeah, sorry, here we are. Yeah.
Ryan, I have a two-part question for you. How are alternative education providers putting pressure on traditional colleges and universities to better prepare young people for future jobs while also lowering costs? And then how do higher education institutions change quickly to remain relevant?
Well, we have a saying around our organization, which is no one's ever gone broke betting against the pace of change in higher education. There are always exceptions to that. Paul LeBlanc on this call is certainly one huge innovator in traditional higher education. But look, the single biggest change in higher education over the last 25 years is that 25 years ago, if you'd surveyed people who were matriculating into a degree program, any degree program, and asked them why they were doing so, only about 50% would have answered with some combination of job, career, or income, specifically some pragmatic reason. Today, if you ask that question consistently, survey after survey, north of 90% say that's the reason. And it makes sense, right? It's become that much more expensive, not just tuition, but fees and the cost of living, room and board. It's become prohibitive for pretty much exactly that portion of the population that most needs the leg up, traditionally associated with higher education. At the same time, over the last 25 years, the world of work and employers, and specifically the skills that employers are asking for in entry-level jobs, has accelerated away from what higher education excels in. Our institutions do a better job, I think, than almost anywhere in the world at equipping students with cognitive skills, critical thinking skills, executive function skills, communication skills. As one dean told me, we prepare students for their 5th job. But the problem is we know now that if you don't get a good first job out of higher education, if you're underemployed in your first job, 2/3 of the time you're going to be underemployed 5 years later, half the time you'll be underemployed a decade later. So not surprising, careers are path dependent. Your second, your third employer are probably going to care more about what your first job was than where you went to college or what you studied or even whether you went to college. So that's the problem that we're facing. If you look at the skills that employers are actually requiring for entry-level jobs, technical and digital skills now outnumber all other skills combined in those job descriptions across virtually every sector of the economy. The problem is on the other side, colleges and universities just are not keeping up with those digital skill requirements. For example, I was speaking to an audience of college and university presidents a couple of years ago, and I asked them, can you raise your hand if your institution provides any training at all on the Salesforce platform? 300,000 open jobs, 5 million jobs will be created over the next 5 years. Increasingly, if you want to get a job as an entry-level salesperson, which is the pathway that so many Americans have taken to rise in corporate America as a point of entry into the enterprise, not one hand went up in the room. So these colleges and universities are not training on the digital skills. They're not training on the business skills, business knowledge that employers are increasingly requiring. And as a result, the connection is broken. And so, what I would say is we coined the term last mile training to reflect this gap that we're seeing, the combination of digital skills and business knowledge that traditional colleges and universities just simply aren't training on. And what's happening is that these new alternative providers, these boot camp programs, income share programs, apprenticeship programs, are just simply filling the gap, seeing an obvious market need, coming in with last mile training programs that are producing better outcomes and better value propositions for students. Some of them are guaranteeing jobs. Some of them are hiring students on the first day of training. So that's a value proposition that's going to be very difficult for a traditional academic and institution to meet or beat.
Sorry, I got stuck with my mute button there. Ryan, can you also address ways that higher education institutions can change quickly in order to be able to remain relevant with all of these kinds of training programs popping up?
Yeah, well, look, I think there are a number of things. Obviously, that the first and best is if the institutions themselves can begin to offer faster and cheaper pathways to good jobs, like the ones we're discussing here. Of course, they risk cannibalizing their existing degree programs by doing that. So you don't have too many who are interested in doing that. But even within the existing degree model, there are a number of things that can be done. The first is turn your degree program upside down. By essentially starting every student with a series of industry recognized certifications. So instead of starting with general education, make sure that the 50% of students who start but don't complete, at least when they drop out, they're leaving with some industry recognized certifications. So they're getting something of value for the tuition paid, the debt incurred, and the time they're spending with the program. The second is digital credentialing. Make sure that you're disaggregating not only your whole program, but individual courses into specific in-demand skills and portable credentials that students can export to LinkedIn and Facebook and demonstrate to employers that they have these skills. The third is work integrated learning. So not everybody can build a Northeastern like co-op program that takes decades and tens of millions of dollars, but there are increasingly marketplaces that are matching real employer projects with specific faculty and courses, so that you can incorporate a real project as a capstone experience in a specific course. So platforms like Ripen, RIIPEN, for example, are doing that. And then finally, rethinking career services. Right, it is unfathomable to me that in this day and age, virtually every institution segregates career services as one office, typically in the corner of campus. Career services needs to be everyone's responsibility within the institution, to the individual, down to the individual faculty member. Deans, department heads, academics, they need to be thinking about what skills they're developing in their programs, in their courses that are going to be marketable for students, that will lead to the kinds of outcomes that students care about. And you can't just simply relegate that to the professionals in career services.
That's really helpful. It's a great setting the stage for us. And I want to now turn to Dr. LeBlanc. And, as Ryan pointed out, SNHU is a college that has a long history of innovation and thinking outside of traditional models of higher education. In fact, I was just reading that SNHU is partnering with edX to launch the university's first micro-bachelor's program. SNHU also acquired LRNG, which serves thousands of opportunity youth being those young people between 16 and 18 who are not in school or in work, and awards badges for a wide range of learning. Can you tell us more about SNHU's move into non-degree or sub-degree program, why it's important, and do you anticipate other colleges offering these kinds of micro-credentials?
Thank you, Grace, and please call me Paul. My degree's in English. If someone ever gets sick and they ask for a doctorate, all I could do is recite a poem. I live in fear of that moment. So Ryan captured it so nicely. I mean, I think what we're seeing and the reason we're moving into non-degree or sub-degree offerings is that there's enormous demand, especially for the students we seek to serve. We often say we serve the 45% of Americans who say they would struggle to come up with $400 for an unexpected car repair. When we did a recent survey, national survey of people who've become unemployed during the pandemic, the number one thing cited that they wanted was skills, skills, skills. It was just like, give me skills that lead to a job. They wanted it quickly. They don't have the luxury of a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree, the deferred payout of that. As Ryan astutely pointed out, it's also more financially out of their reach. So cost is very important to them. And what we're seeing, and we're big believers in competency-based education, is that when we can clearly outline the skills or competencies that people have and map those to high demand jobs and certifications wherever possible, it works. It's a beautiful thing. What I would also say is that universities are not well positioned to move into this space. They struggle to move into this space. They're really degree machines. And look, at degrees will remain important, and we're big believers that these sub-credentials ideally are stackable and are on a pathway that eventually leads to a degree. But the old industrial age notion that students are going to come out of high school, go to school for 2 or 4 years, and then start a career and that would suffice makes no sense in a world in which work is changing at this rapid velocity. And even if you don't change your job, as you know better than most, Grace, that job's going to change out from under you every 2, 3, 4 years. So people are going to have to dip in and out of a learning ecosystem. And we often say what we're trying to build now is an ecosystem that gives people just the right amount of learning. That could be a 2-year degree, but it could be 2 months, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 days, just the right amount of learning, just the right way, at just the right time. And that's a heavy, heavy lift for most of higher ed. There are exceptions, the ASUs and the WGUs and a handful of innovative universities may get there faster, but this is a big struggle. And I think what we'll see is an opening up of the ecosystem so that we start to see more providers come in, and that's happening already. But the breakthrough will be when they can actually get access to Title IV dollars or other ways to help students get access, because we can't do another version of what we've done in traditional higher ed, which is have a kind of bifurcated system of haves and have-nots. When I did a short stint at the Department of Education, I worked on developing something called Equip, which was an attempt to do an experiment that would allow non-universities and colleges, non-IHEs, to enter into the Title IV ecosystem so needy students could get access to funds. That was fiercely resisted by the traditionalists in the department and at the White House at the time. They feared bad actors and not, bad for-profits going to come in and sort of take advantage of the system. It was just a little crazy, but more than a design challenge, we face a cultural challenge in post-secondary education. This is a challenge of attitudes and culture and values and who gets to decide. And that's what makes it so hard, actually. It's not hard from a design perspective. Tons of smart people out there doing this work. We can roadmap this tomorrow. But changing the hearts and minds of universities is a big lift.
Yeah, I would say just from the industry perspective, I think it's the same thing, right? As students move through the system and graduate, whether through a training program, an apprenticeship, or a degree, changing the hearts and minds of business as well to really think about who can lead and who can work is a gigantic challenge. So we really need to have that cultural change across the entire E to E system. So
Yep.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now to Stan Thompson. Stan, the Heinz Endowment has made a significant investment to launch the Pittsburgh Readiness Institute to better connect learning with careers. Can you please share the goals behind the work, the role of the Penn State Outreach Campus in Pittsburgh, and how will you measure success?
Sure. Thank you, Grace. Perhaps it would be wise to start with the why about the Pittsburgh Readiness Institute. As someone who works in philanthropy, there's not a day, actually a week, that doesn't go by when I'm not receiving proposals from folks, and somehow peppered throughout the proposal is the phrase college and career readiness. And the problem with that is if you look at the promise that supposedly is offered through college and career readiness, not nearly enough students are experiencing that carrot, that incentive, that outcome. And so for me, one of the reasons why the Pittsburgh Readiness is a timely offering right now is the fact that we need to begin to think in terms of flipping, and you've heard this through Ryan already and through Paul, how education is conceived, how learning is perceived and is offered to folks to be able to address something much deeper, and that is their purpose. I think the second thing for me is this. If you look at the fact that industry, education, and the community or civic life, those sectors are profoundly misaligned. And because they're profoundly misaligned, they don't necessarily look at what's in the best interest of individual students. And because that support is lacking, you get this unevenness, this inequity when it comes to learning, when it comes to economics, when it comes to people finding themselves wanting to contribute to their civic lives, but not really having the direction to do so. For us too, there was a report that had been commissioned back in 2016 by the Allegheny Conference, and it was called the Inflection Point Report. And in that report, it had talked about the disconnect between industry and the fact that education was not preparing students to fill jobs, and that over a 10-year period, there could be as many as 80,000 jobs that would go unfilled because of this skills gap. And so those are the three things. As I started to, pull these things together and kind of mull over where are we going as a region, I started to think about the notion of community and future readiness. And what does that mean? And of course, what came out of that was this notion of the Readiness Institute. And so the Readiness Institute is really a test solution that we at the Heinz endowments are pursuing, that we're hoping will somehow inspire systems to prepare learners for the conditions of today's work and learning environment. And so we want to be mindful of the multiple drivers of change right now that's influencing our region, but really the nation. And so the Institute's creators and facilitators have positioned it to re-examine and to also reshape learning, work, and leading, particularly for high school juniors and seniors. And so with a special emphasis on social emotional learning and modern literacies. And what do we mean by that? Digital, media, data, design, financial, cultural. Those literacies are really the things that are going to provide a pathway into a successful future, we believe, for students. And so the Readiness Institute's pilot project was launched in the middle of October. It is called the Future Readiness Lab, and it is facilitated by the Consortium for Public Education and its staff of future ready experts, as well as trained lab coaches. And the idea is through this 6-month virtual lab, students from about 8 different economically and racially diverse districts are given the opportunity to work in teams. And they're going to be looking at situations that are real world. So it's a laboratory that looks at real world experiences. The first semester of the lab is going to introduce students to self-awareness, reflection, accountability, and communication skills. And in addition to those leadership competencies that are being offered and pursued by students, participating students are also going to have career exploration opportunities, pathway planning, as well as networking and individual presentations are going to help them grapple with what it means to be future ready. The second semester is going to focus on teamwork, problem analysis, human-centered design, and giving and receiving feedback. And then what we're hoping is that additionally students will have the opportunity to identify a community of industry or school-based problems and then explore a design or a prototype solution. And they'll present this in their teams with peers or to peers and also adult collaborators. In doing so, we're hoping that this exploration equips participants with the skills so that they are becoming community ready. Couple of other things that I would say about the pilot project is it's really timely given the fact that we have this devastating health crisis with COVID-19, as well as the economic consequences that have just left our schools in shambles. And so the Readiness Institute has the flexibility, it's nimble enough to have folks tap into this virtual experience and to be able to pursue resources that are going to move them forward with a different kind of learning that's much more relevant, creative, collaborative, and reflective. And we're seeing that right now, this is so important, especially given the fact that there are students who are lacking engagement, they're lacking in excitement, given the kind of learning that they're currently experiencing in the remote platforms that many of the students find themselves. Now, you had asked about Penn State. Penn State is one of those partners that we had reached out to, primarily because Penn State already has an outreach program at the Energy Innovation Center, which is this converted, used to be this huge vocational technical center in the center of downtown Pittsburgh. It has been renovated. There are university partners in there, there are industry partners in there, and Penn State has a presence there. Because of their alumni base, because they are looking to offer a different kind of educational experience for their undergrads in working in urban environments, they were interested in what we were doing specifically with high school students. So it became a good fit, thinking in terms of creating a pipeline into potentially a higher ed situation. But they were much more interested in kind of learning, how do you at the high school level begin to engage students in a different kind of learning that's relevant and rigorous and problem-based, and how can we then learn from that example and reinforce some of the things that we want for our undergraduate students. The other thing that makes Penn State a viable partner is the fact that the alumni base is worldwide. And when we had conversations with some of the alumni, Mark Cuban and others, who have talked about their business practices and the things that they want to do in the region, it just seemed to be a good fit. And we're going to build on that partnership with other higher institutions of learning. CCAC will be a partner in the days ahead, as well as University of Pittsburgh. We do have some things that we're doing in terms of projects, and there's interest there with those individuals. How do we then measure success? Well, I would say that success would be measured through the power of partnerships that we establish. It's not so much the quantity as much as the quality of partnerships that I believe we want to pursue. The fact that students and teachers, as well as industry and community leaders, are becoming knowledgeable about one another's work. a real problem that we're currently seeing is this siloed approach that the sectors are currently utilizing when it comes to addressing student needs, or what they perceive as student needs and work needs. And the reality is, if I really don't have a clear sense of how I can use whatever expertise I have and resources I have to support students and to broaden their opportunities, by connecting with the other sectors that also have the potential to change lives and help students thrive. If I don't begin to align those things, then we're going to have kids who continue to remain kind of lost in this world that does have opportunities. So I would have to say that it's important that we establish these intentional relationships and alignment. And then finally, I would say we need to do a better job of creating a vibrant ecosystem. You've heard that word being used by Paul, that's much more comprehensive and goes beyond getting individuals a job. That's important, don't get me wrong, but there's so much more behind that. And we've got to begin to think in terms of not only do we prepare, how we prepare individuals for the future, but how do we prepare them to give back to their communities? How do we prepare them to really be focused on their civic duties so that it's systemic, as opposed to looking at how I can transform one life? It's about transforming a community. It's about transforming a world. And we think through being much more intentional about these relationships, these partnerships, we can arrive at a place where we are helping students look beyond their immediate needs and think in terms of how they're going to allow communities to thrive. So I'll stop there. And I don't know if there are other questions that you may have. Would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Gosh, I have so many questions, Stan, but I think, you brought up some really important points about obviously ecosystems and de-siloing systems. And I think it's really about giving young people, especially from underserved backgrounds, with choice, and exposing them to both job opportunities, what are careers, and what is college, because we know that students who are least likely to go to college are those that benefit most from early college experiences. And I obviously, someone who works in the kind of the high school community college space, I love the work that you're doing. And I think that you answered one of the questions I saw in the chat, which was, how can we help students, or sorry, now I've lost it because more people are writing. What about students who do not know what they would like to do as a worker, and really exposing them to the kinds of opportunities that are available to them as early as possible so that they can make efficient decisions for themselves, is one way to do that. And with that, I'm going to turn now to Dr. Bullock. I love community colleges. There's so much innovation that goes on there, and it's such an important training ground for so many people entering into the economy. And it's getting a ton of attention right now. The Biden administration is proposing providing 2 years of community college without debt for anyone looking to learn and improve their skills to keep up with the changing nature of work. Free community college would be outstanding. But as you know so well, it may not be enough to elicit substantially higher graduation rates. What else would you like to see the federal government fund to support community colleges and their mission to expand, to provide students with a pathway to high quality jobs?
Well, thank you, Grace. And this is actually a very good question specific to free community colleges, because off the surface, it sounds like, wow, we're going to get a lot of resources. But in addition to getting the resources, I think it's important that we also look at what else do we need to support students who do take advantage of the free community college. And we know that many students come to us prepared, underprepared, and will need a variety of supportive services in order to, one, begin their studies, two, explore ways in which they or pathways in which they would like to pursue, and then are they ready for the pathways that they have expressed an interest in? Not only that, we do know that although you can promote community college or you can promote a four-year college, the awareness of the community college and what a community college can offer an individual in order for them to succeed in attaining a short-term, long-term credential that leads directly into the workplace, or provides them the foundational courses to transfer to the four-year college or university of choice. What would be very helpful would also to provide additional resources that will also support various needs of students, beginning with a pool of funds that we could partner with community-based organizations that would serve as the conduit or the partner with the community college to help connect with the community and work with the community to address the areas in which they need services, i.e. connecting them to housing, connecting them to counseling, food support, insecurity, child care, various supportive services that we know that once they address those personal needs, then it will allow them to be better prepared to enter into the community college and a training program to begin their studies and be successful in completing it, not having to deal with those secondary challenges that they know do exist. And then once they are in our walls, we want to ensure we have adequate resources to also to provide the internal support, which would be access to tutoring, access to technology or broadband services that may be necessary for them to complete their work. The ability to be able to engage in various externships for them to explore the field in which they are studying. And then the most important thing, I think, is that the student is beginning to see the beginning to the end. And what does that mean? Understanding what are the emerging careers that lead to jobs that can be gradually achieved by doing a micro-credential that ladders into an additional credential that ultimately goes into an associate's and transfers to the four-year. But getting the micro-credential will prepare them to begin to work on the job and then continue their studies as far as they desire to go. In addition to that, I think transportation assistance can that be provided through the government, that funds are allocated to support transportation? Can the federal government support individual regions, meaning provide special allocations that each region can use specific to what they need? For example, do apprenticeships that we may see as more beneficial, provide funding to support secondary transition, meaning students can start from high school taking dual enrollment courses specific to the general education as well as career preparation to transfer ending high school with college credits toward a credential and a clear pathway into a specific career pathway that they want to achieve. In addition to that, provide bridges of services to work with specific underrepresented at-risk students. You know, how do we engage them in meaningful ways in the community to begin to introduce them to career options and supportive programs and services that are necessary to support them in their ultimate goals. So, you know, getting the free is excellent. Of course, we do like that. And one last thing I would think, to also support a big campaign that helps us to continue to address that stigma that sometimes looms over community colleges, that community colleges are less than, versus we are equal to any other institution of choice. Our pathways are through to careers as well as to transfer and to help validate the high quality education and high quality workforce training programs that are available that will support you in getting to whichever destination that you desire to achieve.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think, this idea of ecosystem is something that I'm hearing from all of our speakers, and certain community colleges are such a critical part of that fabric. I'm going to go back to Brian. Brian, I lost my question for you. Here we go. So as someone representing the private sector, I know that employers have a shared burden in preparing future talent. What responsibilities do employers have in the higher education relationship?
Wow. Well, I think they have a great responsibility. The question is, what are they realistically going to do? And what are they incentivized to do or penalized for not doing? The sad fact is that over the last 10, 20 years, employers have largely gotten out of the business of entry-level training. Most employers now are seeking candidates who can be productive on day one, and they don't want to invest. And that's really for, if you look at what the churn rate is of entry-level workers in professional jobs, about 50% of new workers are gone out of those jobs within 2 years. So if you invest significantly in training, you have a free rider problem, because your competitor may be the beneficiary of the training that you're investing in, as your employees are poached by competitors. And so that's a real problem. That's a real problem. I mean, I've written about how large enterprises make all kinds of pledges about how they're going to engage with post-secondary education and train workers. But if you look at what's actually happened, the most you can say is you've got a number of large employers that are sort of putting out free online training resources that are unlikely to be completed. These are asynchronous online training resources that are unlikely to be completed by the populations that we're talking about here, the populations we care about, because completion rates in those asynchronous online programs are atrocious. So what are employers prepared to do? I take a fairly dim view of that. I think most employers are going to do nothing, and that really what we need to be thinking about is growing a whole new sector of intermediaries who are going to stand between the existing post-secondary ecosystem and employers, and effectively build a business around sourcing, screening, last mile training candidates, and providing those candidates up to employers on a try before you buy basis to give them a friction-free pathway to careers. And that's effectively what my firm is doing. We are investing, and we are acquiring business services companies that operate in skill gap sectors that we feel are good candidates for building, for transforming into what we call talent as a service businesses. And we're building a business around effectively apprenticeships, providing purpose-trained entry-level talent to clients on a try before you buy basis. And if we can do that dozens of times and throughput thousands of newly trained candidates a year through to employers, we can demonstrate that there is a solution to the question of how to expand apprenticeships outside of the building and construction trades into tech and healthcare and financial services.
Ryan, I am inviting you to come and learn about the work that we're doing at IBM, so that you can see that there are bright spots out there.
Yeah, I didn't want to pander.
You can pander.
What Ginny Romity's been talked about, and what you've continued to do is definitely, but the problem is it's the exception, not the rule. There are relatively few large enterprises and virtually no SMBs that are similarly focused, because let's be frank, they have other priorities, and nobody gets fired for not hiring someone. In many cases, they get praised for saving money, and everyone else sort of absorbs that extra workload. So how do we solve it? I'm afraid that the answer is not going to be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employers following in IBM's footsteps. I think we need to think about a more systematic solution.
Okay, conversation to be continued. I want to turn it now to Paul and switch up a little bit. So many of you talked about COVID, but many colleges and universities are struggling to pivot to online learning. SNHU has been a leader in this area. More than 155,000 students are enrolled in online courses. That's amazing. In terms of student success, what is most important for institutions offering or moving into online programs?
So it's interesting, and Grace, one of the things that's happened with the pandemic since that data is we keep shooting up. So we've had this huge surge of students coming into the online space now, 167,000 as of last week. And those are all degree-seeking programs with learners on top of that. And in the spring, when the pandemic was hitting full force and we went into this national experiment unasked for of remote learning across the country, I had lots of calls from colleagues who said, look, we don't do very much of this, and I need to understand, what do we need to do to be successful? 85% of the questions were about how to deliver academics. And at some point I would say, time out. You're going to win or lose this battle and everything else. Like, I know you think about academics, like how do we deliver the academic experience? But where we're losing students are issues of equity and access. Do they have access to, the kind of technology they need? Do they have a good Wi-Fi connection? And then it's about a sense of belonging. Before the pandemic, we in post-secondary education saw record levels of anxiety and depression and mental health challenges. And then we just went ahead and layered a pandemic and a recession and civil unrest on top of that. It's like, it's an epidemic, a second pandemic, if you will, that we're facing. So I spent a lot of time talking to them about these questions about how do you make a student feel like they belong? How do they make them feel like they matter? What kinds of responsive services do you have in place? Your faculty should not begin every question with a worry about academic performance. Your faculty should begin every conversation with, how are you doing? Before we start, tell me about your family. How are you doing? And really understanding where students were emotionally and psychologically in the beginning of this. And I would say that while this is an extreme situation, that's kind of where we plant our flag. If all organizations have to be really excellent at one of three things, like, you have to be good at all three, but you're going to sort of plant your flag in operations, right? Amazon, or fulfillment, right? Think of Amazon. If you're going to be really plant your flag in product, you think Apple. But if you're going to plant your flag in the third leg of that stool, which is customer, in our world, students, you have to think really hard about these questions of mattering, belonging, affinity. And these particularly matter for first-generation students, students from underserved communities. I was a first-generation immigrant student in college, and I still get imposter syndrome from time to time. So that's the critical piece. It's actually, your faculty are so good and so dedicated. This may be new stuff to them, but they're going to be determined to make this work, and it will be uneven. That just goes without saying. But have you rallied everything else? And frankly, most of post-secondary education doesn't really put students at the center of things, right? We make students apply to us. We make them feel lucky if they get in. We have, generally speaking, a one-size-fits-all approach to their experience with us. Sure, they'll take some different electives. Sure, Ryan will, be the head of student government, and I'll sort of work on the student newspaper. Someone will do study abroad, somebody won't. But in the end, we're mostly going to have the same experience as we go through it, because our institutions are largely built around themselves. And the pandemic really calls on us to be inordinately focused on students and what individuals need from us and how they feel that they're being cared for.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I realize this time is shrinking rapidly. And so I want to quickly turn it to give one last question to both Stan and Dr. Bullock. And hopefully we'll have time for questions from the audience that I know are coming in through the chat. Please do, regardless of whether we get to your question or not, please put the questions in the chat, and there might be some other ways that we can address those through Schools That Can. So Stan, so much of what you fund is based on partnerships. Can you talk more about the power of partnerships between K-12 post-secondary and industry? I know you talked a lot about ecosystem.
Sure. And the Heinz Endowments has had partnerships across its various priority areas for a number of years. And I could hone in on some specific things, but I think given the limited time that we have, suffice it to say that when we think of partnerships, we're really thinking of we're thinking of making sure that there are 3 objectives or 3 things that we're focusing on. I think the notion of creating authenticity, when you are bringing various groups together to support or organizations to support one another, and especially where students are involved, it's going to be very important that you are doing so with the sense that you are creating something that is real world based, it's relevant. And it's not just something that you've got someone taking on an activity and going through a type of exercise and then checking the box. When we think of partnerships, we're thinking of authenticity. We're thinking of also those partnerships, especially as I'm now thinking about the Readiness Institute, creating agency for those who are involved, especially for students. Oftentimes, when it comes to learning, students really have very little say or are encouraged to really be involved in their own learning and somehow demonstrate voice and some semblance of a purpose in what they're doing. So I would say that this notion of agency is really important. And depending on the organizations that you're partnering with, you really do want to think about this notion of alignment. How are you utilizing the expertise, the resources across these sectors to be much more complementary? Because it's through that that you have the possibility to move beyond something that's just transactional. And so I think with those 3 things in mind, I think that there is the possibility of really having a meaningful relationship that can sustain itself along a pathway, as it were, for students and for those individuals who are trying to create better lives for the ones that they're serving.
Thank you, Stan. Yeah, I think the partnerships are actually really reshaping what post-secondary is, and industry and K-12 as well. I want to turn the final question over to Dr. Bullock. One of your college's goals is to become the region's premier provider of workforce training and increase prosperity and opportunity throughout the region by preparing individuals to meet the emerging workforce needs of the community and employers. Similar question to the one posed to Stan. How are you leveraging partnerships, particularly with industry, to meet that important goal?
That's another very important question, because we need partnerships with industry to support the college in building its workforce ecosystem. So as we develop new programs, we're building the program workforce training as well as the educational component in collaboration with our partners to ensure that what we are putting into the curriculum and the training is exactly what the industry is looking for its future employee to come prepared and ready for work or ready for any element within the organization. So what exactly does that mean? For example, in our automotive technology program, we have partnerships with Ford, GM, and Chrysler. And as a part of that program, students are employed as they go through the training program. So they're getting the hands-on training that can be applied with the industry throughout their education, and upon completing their training, they have a job with that company. In addition to that, we have several high demand programs that are in partnership with our unions, where individuals are taking their general education core courses with us while being trained in 7 of our apprenticeship programs in partnership with the unions, which would include carpentry, which is a 4-year certificate, electrical construction technology, which is a 5-year, and they also can earn the associate's degree, heavy equipment operating, iron workers, 3-year certificate, plumber, 5-year certificate, sheet metal workers, 4-year certificate, and stationary operator. And what that basically entails is the student has what we define as hands-on learning and earning while you are learning process, meaning as they go through the training, they're being paid as a part of the process and are aligning those skills throughout their experiences. In addition to that, we also have partnerships with businesses such as one of our local hospitals. In fact, all of our hospitals, but just to give you an example, with our Allegheny General Hospital, we are partnering with the hospital to assist them in increasing pathways into all the various healthcare fields, linking it to the community, because we find that individuals like working in their community. So by providing training that leads to jobs in a local large business is very attractive. So while working, programs are designed to support an individual in completing a nursing program, to completing an EMT program, or any program in which the hospital is seeking employment from the surrounding, and the hospital is providing the resources to cover tuition and supportive services that are needed to make the program successful. With the bank, we have what's called with PNC Bank Partners Up program that goes into the high schools, attracts students who are seeking an opportunity to work in the banking industry, who may not have seen college as an option, and they're able to engage in taking college courses toward a credential that will allow them to further advance within the bank and also be in that pipeline for further growth and development. And then the last example I give would be with Verizon, which we are working in the IT arena, working with underserved populations, and through that program, we're introducing underrepresented populations to fields in the IT area, introducing them to various courses while in high school, earning college credits toward their credential, connecting that learning into a career, and then completing those studies through high school, and then ultimately coming to the 2-year to finish the required credential, and then having that summer experience to do externship to further advance their motivation and awareness and beyond. So those are just a few. I can go on and talk about the partnership, because partnerships are the foundation in which the community college builds its curricula and workforce training with industry.
Thank you, Dr. Bullock. I want to just, I know we've got about 3 minutes here, but there is one question just to honor everybody who's in our audience that I'll pose, and anybody can pick this up. But I think it's an important question about equity, not tracking. And that's as post-secondary shifts that we're going toward offering a range of different ways for young people and older people and adults to get into 21st century careers. How can we help parents and others understand the shifts in post-secondary education, that there's not only one pathway to economic success?
Be happy to jump in if it's helpful. So I think that I've been spending a lot of time thinking and writing about doing a book for Harvard Education Press right now that argues that time is maybe the greatest enemy of the poor, from low income learners, because everything is harder and takes more time if you're poor, if you're low income. It takes more time to get clean clothes if you don't have a washer dryer in your house. It takes more time to put food in your refrigerator if you don't have a vehicle. And just getting food. We just did a study of our students affected by the pandemic who applied for emergency aid. The number one need amongst 62% of them was food. So I think we were shocked last year when the Chronicle of Higher Ed did a story on food insecurity in American colleges and universities, and it was only 14% of our students report being food insecure. So we have to have programs that are much more flexible and that removes that sort of structure, that sort of rigid tether to time and place. So I would be looking at hybrid programs, synchronous programs that give more flexibility, perhaps self-pacing. We are doing a lot of work in competency-based programs. I'll just finish real quick with the story of a student who was, single mother from a very, very poor part of Boston, if you looked at her transcript at her local community colleges, which are excellent community colleges, they're full of withdrawals and failures. And the reason is she had a daughter with chronic respiratory illness. And every time her little girl would get sick, she would miss 7 to 10 days of school. So she'd fall behind, she missed exams, she got bad grades, and then she would either withdraw if she had time or fail. When we put her in a self-paced program where she could hit the pause button at any moment, she just took off like a rocket. And she's in fact brilliant. And nothing on paper suggested that she was ready for college, when in fact college wasn't ready for her. So you have to look at alternative programs that are coming up, and many of the programs Ryan's talking about as well. You have to just broaden the aperture to take a look at all the ways, as long as that they have value in an ecosystem, as long as they lead along a pathway and aren't dead ends, they can be really valuable and more viable actually.
Thank you, Paul. I think we've really come to the end of our time, sadly, because I think there's so much more we can talk about. And I want to just end by thanking Schools That Can for this wonderful opportunity, for, to Dr. Bullock, Stan, Paul, and Ryan for sharing their expertise with us today. And I want to pass it back to Michael quickly and see if you have any last words for the audience before we close out. Michael, you're on mute.
Just to thank you for everybody for joining. This has really been a stimulating conversation, and we have a lot of work to do. Hope the attendees will join us in February for our E2E Gap event, and then in March we'll have our Robert F. Kennedy event. So look forward to joining with you then. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.